Picture a windowless stone building on the campus of Yale University. No windows, no identifying marks except a skull and crossbones carved above the door. Inside this building called the Tomb, 15 young men lie naked in coffins, confessing their deepest sexual secrets to their fellow initiates. They emerge hours later with new names, lifelong brothers, and access to a network of power that will shape American politics, banking, and intelligence for the next century. This is not a horror movie. This is not ancient history. This is Skull and Bones, and it is happening right now at one of America's most prestigious universities. What you are about to discover will fundamentally change everything you thought you knew about how power actually operates in the United States. We are going to trace the origins of America's most secretive society, follow the money through generations of elite families, and expose the network that has controlled American finance and foreign policy since the mid-1800s. We are going to show you documented evidence, membership lists, financial records, and eyewitness accounts that reveal a conspiracy so vast, so interconnected, that it makes most theories seem tame by comparison. The members call it the Order. Outsiders call it Skull and Bones. But whatever name you use, one fact remains undeniable. This secret society has produced 3 presidents, countless CIA directors, Supreme Court justices, and the architects of American banking and foreign policy. And they all swore a blood oath in a tomb surrounded by human bones. The question is not whether Skull and Bones exists. The question is what they do with all that power. In 1876, a group of Yale students broke into the tomb. What they found inside shocked them so deeply that they published 2 pamphlets exposing the society's secrets. These documents, extremely rare today, described walls adorned with paintings of the founders in Germany. They described rooms filled with human skulls and bones taken from graves. They described a grandfather clock given to each initiate upon joining. They described satanic symbolism and cultic rituals that would be more at home in a medieval devil-worshipping sect than at an American university. But here is what makes this different from every other college fraternity. Skull and Bones members go on to run the country, not metaphorically, literally. Let us start with the most basic fact that the mainstream media desperately wants you to ignore. In the 2004 presidential election, both candidates were members of Skull and Bones. George W. Bush, class of 1968. John Kerry, class of 1966. When asked about their membership, both men gave the exact same response. It's a secret. I can't talk about it. Think about that for a moment. 2 men competing for the most powerful position on earth, and they both belong to the same secret society. They both refuse to discuss it, and the American media barely mentioned it. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented fact, and it is just the beginning. The origins of Skull and Bones do not begin in America. They begin in Germany in the early 1800s, with a secret society that had already mastered the art of hidden influence. According to the 1876 break-in documents, the society's founder, General William Huntington Russell, traveled to Germany before his senior year at Yale. There he formed a close friendship with a leading member of a German secret society. Russell brought back to Yale the authority to found an American chapter, The break-in pamphlet states this explicitly. Bones is a chapter of a corps in a German university. It should properly be called not Skull and Bones Society, but Skull and Bones Chapter. General Russell, its founder, was in Germany before senior year and formed a warm friendship with a leading member of a German society. He brought back with him to college authority to found a chapter here. This is not an American institution. This is a foreign secret society operating on American soil, and it has been doing so since 1832. William Huntington Russell came from one of America's most prominent families. The Russell family fortune came from the opium trade with China. Yes, you read that correctly. The founder of Skull and Bones came from a family that made its money selling drugs. The Russell and Company shipping firm was one of the largest smugglers of opium from Turkey to China in the 1800s. They worked closely with British traders, particularly those connected to the Rothschild financial network, to flood China with narcotics. This is the man who founded the society that would go on to produce American presidents and CIA directors. A drug trafficker's son bringing a German secret society to Yale. Russell's partner in founding the order was Alphonso Taft, whose family would also benefit greatly from their connection to Skull and Bones. Alphonso's son, William Howard Taft, would become both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the only man in American history to hold both positions. And he was a Bonesman, initiated in 1878. The Taft family represents one of the core bloodlines of the order. Generation after generation, Taft descendants have been initiated into Skull and Bones. Generation after generation, they have held positions of enormous power. This is not about individual merit. This is about dynastic succession. This is about power passed down through blood and ritual. In the early years, the order drew its membership from a small cluster of families connected to the Connecticut elite. These were not old money families in the European sense. These were new money families, industrial fortunes built on railroads, shipping, manufacturing, and banking. They were the American aristocracy, and they needed a system to ensure their children would maintain and expand that power. Skull and Bones provided that system. It created lifelong bonds between young men who would go on to control finance, law, education, intelligence, and politics. It gave them a shared identity, shared secrets, and a network of brothers who would always help each other climb higher. The membership lists tell the story. The Whitney family, whose fortune came from cotton and banking. The Harriman family, railroad barons who would later finance both the Bolshevik Revolution and Nazi Germany. The Rockefeller family, oil magnates who would create the Federal Reserve System. The Stimson family, who would produce 2 secretaries of war. The Bundy family, who would run the CIA and orchestrate Vietnam War policy. The Bush family, who would produce 2 presidents and a CIA director. These are not random successful people. These are dynasties, and Skull and Bones is the thread connecting them all. By the mid-1800s, the order had perfected its recruitment strategy. Every year, 15 juniors at Yale are tapped for membership. The selection happens through a bizarre ritual called Tap Day, where existing members literally tap chosen students on the shoulder and whisper, "Skull and Bones, accept or reject." Those who accept are sworn to absolute secrecy. They are told never to mention the society's name in the presence of non-members. They are told never to acknowledge membership publicly. They are told that their loyalty to the order supersedes all other loyalties except to God. The breaking of this secrecy code is taken so seriously that members use coded language even in private correspondence. In internal documents obtained by researchers, members refer to themselves only as P, short for patriarch. Non-members are called barbarians or Gentiles. Yale itself is called the Temple. The rest of the world is called vanity. This linguistic separation reveals the core belief of the order. They are the enlightened elite, and everyone else is beneath them. They are the patriarchs, the fathers of society, destined to rule. Everyone else is a barbarian, existing only to be governed. The secrecy extends to every aspect of the order's operations. When members meet, they do so behind locked doors with guards posted. Internal documents are printed with disguised references. Meeting minutes never use real names. Even the society's property holdings are hidden behind shell corporations and trusts. This level of secrecy would be remarkable for any organization. But for a college fraternity, it is unprecedented. It is also completely unnecessary unless the true purpose of the organization is far more significant than mere networking. The initiation ceremony itself provides crucial insight into the order's true nature. Based on accounts from the 1876 break-in and later testimonies from members who broke their oaths, the ritual is designed to psychologically break down the initiate and rebuild him as a loyal member of the brotherhood. The process begins with the new member being led into the tomb in total darkness. He is stripped naked. He is placed in a coffin. For hours he lies in darkness, while members howl and scream around him, dressed as skeletons and devils. The new member is required to confess his entire sexual history in explicit detail. Every secret, every shame, every hidden desire must be revealed to his new brothers. This is not hazing. This is psychological manipulation. By extracting these confessions, the order gains permanent leverage over each member. Every skeleton in your closet is now known to 14 other men who will become some of the most powerful people in America. You can never betray the order because they know everything about you. After the confession, the initiate emerges from the coffin reborn. He is given a new name, used only within the order. He is told he is now part of something greater than himself, a brotherhood that will last his entire life. He is told that his brothers will help him succeed in ways he cannot imagine. And he is told that he must do the same for them. This is not fellowship. This is mind control. This is the creation of what researchers have called establishment zombies, young men programmed to see themselves as part of an elite class with the right and duty to rule over others. The symbolism within the tomb reinforces this programming. The break-in documents describe rooms decorated with skulls and crossbones. They describe paintings showing members in Germany, linking the American chapter back to its foreign origins. They describe artifacts from secret societies around the world, from Masonic lodges to mystery schools. Most disturbingly, they describe human remains, real human skulls, real human bones. According to multiple sources, including the break-in pamphlets, The order possesses at least 3 sets of human remains that are used in ceremonies. One skull is marked with the name Sperry, apparently taken from a grave in New Haven. Another is rumored to be the skull of the Apache leader Geronimo, allegedly stolen by Prescott Bush during his military service. Why would a secret society of American elites use human remains in their rituals? The answer lies in the occult foundations of the order. This is not a Christian organization, despite many members' public displays of faith. This is something far older and darker. The skull and crossbones symbol itself is deeply occult. It has been used throughout history by mystery schools, alchemists, and satanic cults. In medieval occultism, the skull represented death and rebirth, the destruction of the old self, and the creation of a new illuminated being. The crossed bones represented the transformation of base matter into gold, the alchemical great work. When skull and bones members surround themselves with human remains, they are not simply being morbid. They are participating in a ritual tradition that goes back centuries, one that believes in transformation through death symbolism, in gaining power through occult practices, in separating the enlightened from the profane. Art historian Elizabeth Stuckey analyzed the use of skull imagery in modern art and concluded that societies focused on skulls are denying the Christian concept of individual souls created in God's image. Instead, they embrace either primitive paganism or sophisticated Satanism. The skull, stripped of flesh and personality, represents the rejection of human dignity and the embrace of power through death. This analysis applies perfectly to skull and bones. The society takes young men from Christian families, many of them genuinely religious, and subjects them to rituals that would be at home in a satanic cult. The psychological impact is profound and permanent. Consider the testimony of members who have spoken publicly despite their oaths. Ron Rosenbaum, writing in Esquire magazine in 1977, interviewed Bonesmen and described the initiation as harrowing. He wrote about hearing strange cries and moans coming from the tomb during initiation ceremonies. He described members dressed as skeletons howling at initiates. He confirmed the use of coffins and forced confessions. But Rosenbaum also noted something crucial. Despite the bizarre and disturbing nature of the rituals, members uniformly described their skull and bones experience as the most important of their lives. They spoke of bonds stronger than family. They spoke of a sense of mission and purpose. They spoke of feeling chosen, special, destined for greatness. This is the power of cult programming. By subjecting initiates to intense psychological experiences, by creating shared secrets and shared shame, by reinforcing the narrative of elite destiny, the order creates loyalty that supersedes normal human bonds. Bonesmen will help each other over more qualified outsiders. They will protect each other's secrets. They will advance each other's careers. Because they are not just colleagues or friends. They are brothers in a secret priesthood. The grandfather clock tradition reinforces this lifelong bond. Upon initiation, each new member receives an antique grandfather clock. This clock is supposed to stay with the Bonesman for his entire life, a constant reminder of his oath and his brotherhood. Every time he looks at that clock, he is reminded that he is not just an individual. He is part of the order. From 1832 to the present day, this tradition has continued unbroken. That means there are currently over 2,000 living Bonesmen, each with a grandfather clock in his home, each bound by oaths of secrecy, each part of a network of power that spans banking, intelligence, law, education, and politics. 2,000 men who all know each other's deepest secrets. 2,000 men who have all been through the same bizarre rituals. 2,000 men who see themselves as the rightful rulers of America. And every year, 15 more join their ranks. The question is not whether this network uses its power. The question is how much of America's history has been shaped by decisions made in the tomb. To understand how the order translates ritual into real-world power, we need to follow the money. And the money trail leads directly to Wall Street, to the creation of the Federal Reserve, and to the financing of both communist revolutions and fascist regimes. The story begins with the class of 1900. This single class of 15 men included some of the most important figures in 20th century American finance. Percy Rockefeller, nephew of John D. Rockefeller, and eventual director of dozens of corporations. Frederick Allen, who would become a director of Chase Bank. U.E.S. Griswold, another Chase director. These 3 men alone controlled enormous pools of capital. But the real power center was the class of 1913. This class included W. Averell Harriman, who would become the single most important Bonesman of the 20th century. Harriman's story is the story of how the order took control of American banking and intelligence. Averell Harriman was born into railroad money. His father, E. H. Harriman, had built one of America's largest railroad empires through ruthless business practices and close coordination with J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers. When E. H. Harriman died in 1909, he left his sons Averell and Roland a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Both brothers were tapped for skull and bones. Roland in the class of 1917, Averell in 1913. Together, they would use their skull and bones connections to build a banking empire that would shape world history. In 1919, Averell Harriman founded W.A. Harriman and Company, a private bank. His partner was Knight Woolley, class of 1917, fellow Bonesman. Other partners included Ray Morris, class of 1901, and Ellery James, class of 1917. Notice the pattern. Every single founding partner of Harriman's bank was a member of Skull and Bones. This was not coincidence. This was the order taking care of its own. Young Bonesmen fresh out of Yale were given partnerships in a major bank, not because of their financial expertise, but because of their membership in the brotherhood. The bank was essentially an operational vehicle for the order. In 1933, Harriman's bank merged with Brown Brothers to form Brown Brothers Harriman. This merger brought in even more Bonesmen. Prescott Bush, class of 1917, father of President George H.W. Bush and grandfather of President George W. Bush, became a partner. Robert Lovett, class of 1918, who would later become Secretary of Defense, joined as a partner. Mortimer Seabury, class of 1909, became a partner. By 1933, Brown Brothers, Harriman was effectively run by Skull and Bones. 8 of the firm's partners were members of the Order. This gave the Order direct control over one of America's most powerful investment banks at a crucial moment in history: the rise of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Here is where the story gets dark. Very dark. Because Brown Brothers, Harriman did not just make money off of American capitalism. They made money off of Hitler's Third Reich. Prescott Bush, the Bonesman who would found America's most powerful political dynasty, was a director and partner in companies that did business with Nazi Germany throughout the 1930s. He was a director of Union Banking Corporation, which was essentially the American branch of a German bank, run by Nazi industrialist Fritz Thyssen. Thyssen, one of Hitler's earliest and most important financial backers, used Union Banking Corporation to move money and assets between Germany and the United States. The evidence is not speculative. It is in government documents. In 1942, the United States government seized the assets of Union Banking Corporation under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Prescott Bush's name is on the seizure order as one of the directors. The bank was literally designated as a Nazi front organization, and a Bonesman was running it. But Prescott Bush was not alone. Multiple other partners at Brown Brothers, Harriman had connections to companies doing business with Nazi Germany. The bank handled financial transactions for firms that used slave labor in concentration camps. They moved money for industrialists who built Hitler's war machine. And all of this was being coordinated through the Skull and Bones network. Because at the same time that Bonesmen at Brown Brothers, Harriman were financing the Nazis, other Bonesmen at Guarantee Trust Company were doing the same thing. Guarantee Trust was another operational vehicle for the Order. Between 1915 and 1935, the bank had 9 directors or officers who were members of Skull and Bones. Harold Stanley, class of 1908, was president of the bank from 1921 to 1928, the crucial years when both the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of Nazism were being financed by Wall Street. Frank Shepard, class of 1917, was a vice president at Guarantee Trust from 1920 to 1934. Knight Woolley, before joining Brown Brothers, Harriman, worked at Guarantee Trust from 1919 to 1920. Percy Rockefeller, class of 1900, was a director. Thomas Cochrane, class of 1894, was a director. Harry Payne Whitney, class of 1894, whose family controlled multiple Standard Oil fortunes, was a director. The concentration of Skull and Bones members in Guarantee Trust was even more remarkable than at Brown Brothers Harriman. This was a bank with over $900 million in assets, and nearly a dozen of its top officers were members of a secret society that met in a tomb surrounded by human bones. What were they using this power to do? They were financing revolution and war on both sides. Guarantee Trust was deeply involved in financing the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. They extended credits to Lenin's government. They helped move gold and currency between New York and Moscow. At the same time, through their European branches, they were extending credits to German industrialists who would later support Hitler. This was not accidental. This was not a series of unfortunate business decisions. This was the Order using its financial power to shape world events according to its philosophy. That philosophy, according to researcher Anthony Sutton, who spent years investigating the order, is based on the Hegelian dialectic: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Create two opposing forces, control both sides, and manage the conflict to produce a desired outcome. In this case, the order financed both communism and fascism, knowing that the conflict between them would reshape the world order and create opportunities for profit and control. The evidence supporting this interpretation is overwhelming. During World War II, American corporations controlled by Bonesmen continued to do business with Nazi Germany even after the United States entered the war. Standard Oil, connected to the order through the Rockefeller family, had 6 tankers under Panamanian registry, manned by Nazi officers carrying fuel oil to Nazi submarine refueling bases. This is documented in military intelligence reports from July 1941. RCA, linked to the order through the Morgan and Rockefeller interests, continued coordination with Nazi operations during the war. Chase Bank, controlled by Rockefeller interests and multiple Bonesmen directors, actively collaborated with the Nazis in occupied France. A 1944 Treasury Department investigation found that Chase Bank in Paris maintained accounts for the German embassy and went out of its way to please German authorities, viewing good relations with the Nazis as an excellent way to preserve their position in France. Let that sink in. While American soldiers were dying to defeat Hitler, American banks controlled by Skull and Bones members were helping Nazi Germany. And after the war, none of these men faced prosecution. In fact, many of them went on to positions of even greater power. Prescott Bush, whose bank was seized as a Nazi front, became a United States Senator. His son would become CIA Director and President. His grandson would become President. Averell Harriman, the Bonesman who built the banking empire that financed both Nazis and communists, did not end his career in banking. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt appointed him as a special envoy to Europe. In 1943, he became ambassador to the Soviet Union. In 1946, he became ambassador to Great Britain. Later, he served as Secretary of Commerce, Governor of New York, and chief negotiator at the Paris peace talks during Vietnam. Think about this progression. A man whose bank financed Hitler's rise to power becomes America's ambassador to Stalin's Soviet Union. A man connected to Nazi front organizations becomes the chief architect of American-Soviet relations during the Cold War. This is not irony. This is the order placing its members in positions where they can manage both sides of the conflict they helped create. But Harriman was just one Bonesman in government. The real takeover happened in the intelligence community, and it happened because of another powerful Skull and Bones family, the Bundys. Harvey Hollister Bundy, class of 1909, spent his career moving between Wall Street law firms and government positions. He was special assistant to the Secretary of War during both World Wars. His constant presence in the War Department gave him access to America's most sensitive military and intelligence secrets, and he used that access to place other Bonesmen in positions of power. Harvey Bundy had 2 sons, McGeorge Bundy, class of 1940, and William Bundy, class of 1939. Both brothers were initiated into Skull and Bones. Both brothers would go on to run American foreign policy during the most critical years of the Cold War. McGeorge Bundy became National Security Advisor to Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. From 1961 to 1966, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington, controlling the flow of intelligence to the president and shaping decisions on Cuba, Berlin, and most importantly, Vietnam. William Bundy served as CIA analyst, then Assistant Secretary of State, and later editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, the official publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Bundy brothers orchestrated America's escalation in Vietnam. They drafted the policies. They selected the targets. They managed the flow of information to the president. And according to multiple sources, including Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, they knew from the beginning that the war was unwinnable. They sent 58,000 Americans to die in a war they knew could not be won. Why would they do this? The answer lies in the Order's philosophy of managed conflict. Vietnam was not about defeating communism. It was about maintaining permanent tension between superpowers, creating opportunities for profit through military contracts, and expanding the power of the national security state. The Bundy brothers were not incompetent. They were following the script. But the Bundys were not the only Bonesmen running intelligence operations. The Central Intelligence Agency, from its creation in 1947, has been dominated by members of Skull and Bones. The list is staggering. William Bundy served in the CIA's Analysis Division during the 1950s. His work focused on Soviet capabilities and intentions, giving the Order direct access to America's most sensitive intelligence on its supposed enemy. Coincidentally, William Bundy was married to the daughter of Dean Acheson, Secretary of State and member of multiple Order-controlled organizations, including the Council on Foreign Relations. Hugh Cunningham, class of 1934, served as CIA station chief in multiple sensitive locations during the Cold War. Dino Pioncio, class of 1950, was deputy chief of the CIA's Soviet division. This meant a Bonesman was in charge of gathering intelligence on the Soviet Union at the same time that other Bonesmen like Averell Harriman were negotiating with Soviet leaders. The Order controlled both sides of the intelligence game. But the most important CIA Bonesman was not officially a member of the agency at all. George H.W. Bush, class of 1948, has always claimed he was CIA director for only 1 year, from 1976 to 1977. However, documents released decades later show that Bush had connections to the CIA going back to at least 1963. A FBI memo from November 22, 1963, the day President Kennedy was assassinated, mentions briefing a George Bush of the CIA about the reaction of Cuban exiles to the president's death. For years, Bush denied this was him. He claimed it must have been a different George Bush who worked for the CIA. But researchers have never found evidence of any other George Bush employed by the agency at that time. What was a Bonesman doing connected to CIA operations in 1963? What was his role in operations involving Cuban exiles, the same exiles connected to the Bay of Pigs disaster and multiple assassination plots against Castro? These questions have never been satisfactorily answered. What we know for certain is that George H.W. Bush went on to become CIA Director, Vice President, and President, while maintaining his lifelong loyalty to Skull and Bones. The Bush family represents the ultimate expression of order power. 3 generations of Bonesmen, each holding positions of enormous influence. Prescott Bush, class of 1917, senator and Wall Street banker. George H.W. Bush, class of 1948, CIA Director, Vice President, and President. George W. Bush, class of 1968, President of the United States. No other family in American history has produced 2 presidents from the same secret society. During the 2004 presidential campaign, when both candidates were revealed to be Bonesmen, the American media barely covered it. When reporters did ask about their membership, both Bush and Kerry gave nearly identical responses. Bush said, "It's so secret we can't talk about it." Kerry said, "I wish there was something I could manifest from that." Both men laughed off further questions. The American public never got a serious explanation for why 2 men competing for the presidency belonged to the same secret society. This is not normal. In a healthy democracy, this would be the biggest story of the campaign. Instead, it was treated as a quirky footnote. The conspiracy is not that Skull and Bones exists. The conspiracy is that the media refuses to investigate what it means. The Council on Foreign Relations provides another layer of order control over American policy. Founded in 1921 by figures closely connected to Skull and Bones, the CFR has become the primary vehicle for translating elite consensus into government policy. Virtually every president since Franklin Roosevelt has stacked his cabinet with CFR members. The organization's membership reads like a who's who of American power. Bank presidents, corporate CEOs, media executives, foundation heads, and of course, numerous members of Skull and Bones. The connection between the Order and the CFR is direct and documented. According to historian Carol Quigley, who had access to the organization's papers, the CFR grew out of a secret society founded by Cecil Rhodes, with the goal of bringing the world under a single government dominated by English-speaking elites. Rhodes was financed by the Rothschilds, who were closely allied with the Morgan and Rockefeller interests, which were in turn controlled by Skull and Bones members. The founding members of the American branch of this network, which became the CFR, included multiple Bonesmen. The organization's early funding came from Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations, both controlled by Order members. The CFR's headquarters building in New York was donated by David Rockefeller, whose family has produced multiple Bonesmen, including Percy Rockefeller, class of 1900. Through the CFR, the Order gained the ability to shape American foreign policy without holding elected office. CFR study groups draft position papers that become government policy. CFR members move seamlessly between corporate boardrooms, foundation offices, and government positions. And a disproportionate number of CFR leaders have been members of Skull and Bones. This interlocking network extends beyond government and banking into media. Henry Luce, founder of Time magazine and Life magazine, was class of 1920. Luce used his media empire to promote the internationalist agenda favored by the Order. His publications championed American entry into World War II, supported the creation of the United Nations, and promoted the Cold War consensus that justified permanent military mobilization. William F. Buckley, Jr., founder of National Review magazine, was class of 1950. Buckley positioned himself as a conservative alternative to the liberal media establishment, but his version of conservatism always aligned perfectly with order interests. Strong military, interventionist foreign policy, free trade that benefited multinational corporations, and social policies that maintained elite control while allowing limited cultural change. Alfred Cowles, class of 1913, controlled Cowles Communications, which owned the Des Moines Register and Minneapolis Star. Russell Davenport, class of 1923, was an editor at Fortune magazine. The pattern is clear. The order placed its members in positions to control the flow of information to the American public. When you control banking, intelligence, foreign policy, and media, you effectively control the country. You decide which wars to fight. You decide which stories get coverage. You decide which politicians get funding. You decide which ideas enter mainstream discourse and which get dismissed as conspiracy theory. This is not democracy. This is oligarchy with a democratic facade. The order's control extends deep into the legal system as well. Some of America's most powerful law firms are saturated with Bonesmen. Lord, Day, and Lord, dominated by the Lord family. Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett, controlled by the Thatcher family. Debevoise, Plimpton, the Rockefeller family's personal law firm. These firms do not just represent wealthy clients. They shape corporate law, negotiate the merger deals that concentrate economic power, and defend elite interests against government regulation. The revolving door between these firms and government creates a seamless web of power. Bonesmen work at elite law firms, then move to government positions, then return to the firms with insider knowledge and connections. They draft legislation that benefits their clients, then rotate back to the private sector to help those clients exploit the laws they just wrote. This is not corruption in the traditional sense. This is the system working exactly as the order designed it. Education is another arena of order domination. The society's influence over Yale is obvious and total. But the order's reach extends far beyond New Haven. Through foundation funding and academic appointments, Bonesmen have shaped American education for over a century. The story begins with three Bonesmen who transformed American higher education in the late 1800s. Daniel Coit Gilman, class of 1852, became president of Johns Hopkins University and created the model for the modern research university. Andrew Dixon White, class of 1853, founded Cornell University. Timothy Dwight, class of 1849, became president of Yale. These three men, all Bonesmen, all working in coordination, imported the German university model to America. This German system, based on Hegelian philosophy, emphasized the primacy of the state over the individual, collective identity over personal freedom, and training of an elite managerial class to govern the masses. It was the opposite of the classical liberal education that had previously dominated American colleges. And it was introduced to America by members of a secret society founded in Germany. The transformation of American education continued in the 20th century with Rockefeller Foundation funding. The General Education Board established by John D. Rockefeller, with heavy involvement from order members, spent hundreds of millions of dollars reshaping American schools. Their stated goal was to create efficient workers for an industrial economy, not independent, critical thinkers. One internal memo stated explicitly, "We shall not try to make these people, or any of their children, into philosophers or men of learning. We have not to raise up from among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply. This is social engineering on a massive scale, the deliberate dumbing down of American education to create a compliant workforce. And it was orchestrated by the order through foundation grants and academic appointments. The same families that controlled banking and intelligence also controlled what American children learned in school. The occult dimension of the order cannot be ignored. This is not simply a networking society for ambitious young men. The rituals, the symbolism, the use of human remains, all point to something deeper and darker. The order practices what can only be described as satanic initiation, designed to separate initiates from Christian morality and bind them to the brotherhood through shared participation in taboo acts. The skull and crossbone symbol is not a meaningless emblem. In occult tradition, the skull represents the death of the old self and rebirth into illuminated consciousness. It is a symbol used by mystery schools, alchemists, and satanic orders throughout history. The fact that the order uses actual human skulls in their ceremonies, not representations, indicates a belief in the power of death symbolism and possibly in the magical properties of human remains. The number 15 is also significant. Each year, exactly 15 new members are initiated. In occult numerology, 15 reduces to 6, and 3 groups of 15 equals 45, which reduces to 9. 9 is considered a power number in occult traditions, representing completion and mastery. The structure is not random. It reflects occult beliefs about numbers and their spiritual properties. The grandfather clock tradition has occult significance as well. Clocks represent time, and in mystery school teachings, initiates must learn to master time, to understand the cycles of history and how to manipulate them. The constant presence of the clock in a Bonesman's home serves as a reminder that he is now outside normal time, part of an elite that operates according to different rules and longer time horizons than ordinary people. The naked initiation ritual, where new members lie in coffins and confess sexual secrets, is a classic degradation technique used in occult initiations. It serves multiple purposes. It breaks down the ego, creates psychological bonding through shared humiliation, provides blackmail material, and marks a clear before and after in the initiate's life. You are not the same person after lying naked in a coffin, surrounded by screaming skeletons, while confessing your deepest shames. That experience changes you, and that is precisely the point. Former members who have broken their silence describe the psychological impact as profound and lasting. They speak of feeling fundamentally different after initiation. They describe a sense of being chosen, of having access to secret knowledge, of being part of something ancient and powerful. This is cult programming, pure and simple. The rituals are designed to create a religious-level commitment to the order. But what do members actually believe? What philosophy justifies their actions and their secrecy? The answer appears to be a form of social Darwinism mixed with Hegelian dialectics and occult elitism. The order believes that history is driven by conflicts between opposing forces, that these conflicts can be managed by enlightened elites, and that such management is not only justified, but necessary for human progress. In this worldview, ordinary people are incapable of governing themselves. They need to be guided, manipulated, and when necessary, deceived for their own good. Democracy is a useful fiction, a way to give the masses the illusion of control, while the real decisions are made behind closed doors by those who truly understand how the world works. War is not a tragedy, but a tool, a way to reorganize society, test new technologies, and maintain the power of the managerial class. This philosophy explains the order's apparent contradictions. How can the same people finance both communism and fascism? Because they do not care about ideology, they care about control. As long as they manage both sides of any conflict, the outcome will serve their interests regardless of which side wins. How can they claim to be patriots while undermining national sovereignty through organizations like the CFR and support for world government? Because their loyalty is not to America, but to their class, the international elite who see national borders as obstacles to be managed or eliminated. The evidence for this philosophy comes from the actions and statements of prominent Bonesmen. David Rockefeller, whose family has produced multiple order members, wrote in his memoirs, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a direct confession from a member of the elite that yes, they are working to undermine American sovereignty in favor of a global system they control. And Rockefeller is connected to the order through multiple family members and through decades of coordination with other Bonesmen in banking and policy organizations." Carroll Quigley, the Georgetown professor who studied the Rhodes-Milner group that spawned the CFR, wrote, "The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert." Quigley was not a conspiracy theorist. He was an insider, given access to the organization's records. And he confirmed that yes, there is a network of elites working to control the world economy through central banks and international institutions. The fact that this network is heavily populated by members of Skull and Bones is not coincidence. The modern influence of the order is harder to track than in previous generations, because members have become more careful about publicity. But the pattern continues. Robert Kagan, class of 1980, is a leading neoconservative intellectual whose writings helped justify the Iraq War. Stephen Schwartzman, class of 1969, founded Blackstone Group, one of the world's largest private equity firms. Austin Goolsbee, class of 1991, served as chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. The order continues to tap 15 juniors every year at Yale. The rituals continue in the tomb. The grandfather clocks are still distributed. The lifelong bonds are still formed. And Bonesmen still help each other climb to positions of power in finance, law, intelligence, and government. The system has worked for nearly 200 years. Why would they change it now? In recent years, the order has made some concessions to changing social norms. Women were admitted beginning in 1991 after decades of pressure. But the fundamental structure remains unchanged. The same 15 families that dominated the society in the 1800s still produce a disproportionate number of members. The same industries attract Bonesmen: finance, law, intelligence, foreign policy. What makes this especially disturbing is that the order's influence has grown, even as American democracy has supposedly expanded. We have universal suffrage, civil rights laws, campaign finance regulations, Freedom of Information Acts. Yet somehow, members of a secret society that meets in a windowless tomb, surrounded by human skulls, still manage to become president, CIA director, secretary of war, national security advisor, and chairman of the Federal Reserve. How is this possible in a democracy? The answer is that we do not live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy with democratic window dressing. Elections matter only at the margins. The real decisions about war and peace, about monetary policy, about which industries get subsidized and which get regulated, are made by networks of elites who know each other from college secret societies, exclusive clubs, foundation boards, and corporate directorships. Skull and Bones is not the only such network. There are others: the Bohemian Grove, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, Freemasonry at the highest levels. But the order is unique in its combination of early recruitment, intense psychological programming, lifelong bonds, and dynastic succession. By getting members young, at age 21, and putting them through traumatic bonding experiences, the order creates loyalty that lasts a lifetime and extends across generations. The concentration of power in so few hands is historically unprecedented. At the Jekyll Island meeting where the Federal Reserve was planned, 7 men representing 1/4 of the world's wealth met in secret to design America's banking system. At least 3 of those men were connected to Skull and Bones. J.P. Morgan, who owned Jekyll Island, had multiple Bonesmen in his firm. The Rockefeller interests were represented through their close alliance with Morgan, and Percy Rockefeller was class of 1900. And the Harriman interests, through their banking relationships, were deeply tied to the order. That meeting in November 1910 changed American history. Before the Federal Reserve, the federal government could not easily finance wars or manipulate the economy. After the Federal Reserve, endless war and permanent inflation became possible. The national debt, which had been minimal for most of American history, began its inexorable climb. The boom and bust cycle, which the Fed was supposedly created to prevent, actually intensified. And the bankers who designed the system became fabulously wealthy, while ordinary Americans saw their savings eroded by inflation. This was not an accident. This was the plan. Create a central bank controlled by private bankers. Give it the power to create money from nothing. Use that power to finance government spending and corporate expansion, and extract wealth from the productive economy through the hidden tax of inflation. And place members of the order in key positions throughout the system to ensure it operates according to elite interests. The same pattern repeats in foreign policy. The escalation in Vietnam was orchestrated by Bonesmen McGeorge and William Bundy. The Iraq wars were supported by Bonesmen in both Bush administrations. The expansion of NATO after the Cold War, which has led to confrontation with Russia, was promoted by Bonesmen in policy positions. Every major foreign policy decision of the past 75 years has had order fingerprints on it. Why does this matter? Because if a small group of men initiated into a secret society through satanic rituals are making decisions about war and peace, about the value of your money, about what your children learn in school, then you do not live in a free country. You live in a sophisticated form of feudalism, where the aristocracy has learned to hide behind democratic institutions. The genius of the system is that it is almost impossible to oppose. If you point out that both presidential candidates belong to the same secret society, you are called a conspiracy theorist. If you note that the same families have controlled banking for generations, you are accused of anti-Semitism or class warfare. If you observe that intelligence agencies are dominated by members of elite secret societies, you are dismissed as paranoid. The system defends itself not through violence, but through ridicule. The mainstream media, much of it controlled by order members or their allies, simply refuses to take the story seriously. When ABC News was preparing a story on Skull and Bones in 2004, they were given unprecedented access to the tomb. But the resulting story was a puff piece that made the society seem like a harmless fraternity rather than a pipeline to power. This is how the conspiracy operates, not by hiding completely, but by controlling the narrative. The bigger pattern becomes clear when you map the connections. The same families intermarry. The Whitneys marry the Vanderbilts. The Harrimans marry the Whitneys. The Bundys marry into the Atchison family. These are not random marriages. They are dynastic alliances designed to concentrate power and wealth within a closed circle. And Skull and Bones provides the institutional framework that allows these families to coordinate their activities. Behind the families are the institutions. Behind the institutions are the ideas. And the ideas all trace back to the same source: the belief that ordinary people cannot be trusted with freedom, that enlightened elites must manage society, that ends justify means, and that power flows to those willing to use it without moral constraint. This is not conservative or liberal in the traditional sense. Bonesmen have served in both Republican and Democratic administrations. They have promoted both free market capitalism and government intervention. What unites them is not ideology, but class interest. They want a world where their children inherit power, where their wealth is protected from democratic redistribution, where their decisions shape history. Whether that world is achieved through capitalism or socialism, through democracy or dictatorship, matters less than maintaining their position at the top. The most disturbing aspect of the order is not its power, but its patience. This is an institution that thinks in terms of generations, not election cycles. They place their members in junior positions and wait for them to rise. They fund academic research that will not bear fruit for decades. They shape cultural norms gradually, through foundation grants and media influence, until what was once unthinkable becomes accepted. This is long-term social engineering, executed by people who know they are building something that will outlast them. Consider the multi-generational nature of the conspiracy. Prescott Bush finances Nazis in the 1930s. His son, George H.W. Bush, becomes CIA director in the 1970s, vice president in the 1980s, president in the late 80s. His grandson, George W. Bush, becomes president in 2001 and uses the September 11th attacks to launch wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that are still ongoing. 3 generations, each building on the work of the previous generation, each advancing the same agenda of concentrated power and permanent war. This is not something you can vote your way out of. Both parties are compromised. The media is captured. The academic establishment is dependent on foundation funding controlled by order allies. The legal system is staffed by order members. The intelligence agencies are led by order members. What options does the average American have when every institution has been infiltrated? The answer is consciousness. The first step is understanding that this is not normal, that a democracy should not be run by members of a secret society, that the concentration of power in so few hands is dangerous, regardless of their intentions. The second step is rejecting the stigma attached to conspiracy research. The evidence is not hidden. The membership lists are available. The corporate connections are documented. The policy coordination is observable. This is not theory. This is documented fact that the mainstream refuses to acknowledge. The third step is building alternative institutions. The order maintains power through control of existing institutions. Creating new institutions, media, schools, banks, political organizations that explicitly reject elite domination and secret society influence is the only way forward. This is difficult, expensive, and dangerous work, but it is necessary. The final question is whether the order's power is absolute or whether there are limits. The answer is complex. They control enormous resources and hold positions throughout the system. But they are not all-powerful. They face resistance from nationalist movements, from religious institutions that maintain moral authority, from whistleblowers within their own ranks, and from the simple human desire for freedom that refuses to be completely extinguished. What you do with this information is up to you. You can dismiss it as conspiracy theory and go back to believing that America is a democracy where elections matter and anyone can succeed through hard work. Or you can look at the evidence, follow the connections, and recognize that power in America operates very differently than you were taught in civics class. Skull and Bones is not the cause of all problems, but it is a perfect case study in how elite power actually works. By following the Order's operations over nearly 200 years, we can see how networks of initiated members coordinate across institutions, how they use secrecy and psychological bonding to maintain loyalty, how they place their own in positions of power, and how they shape society according to their interests while maintaining the appearance of democratic legitimacy. The rituals in the tomb are not just bizarre hazing. They are creating a ruling class that sees itself as fundamentally different from ordinary Americans, bound by oaths stronger than constitutional duties, loyal to brothers rather than to country. When that ruling class controls banking, intelligence, foreign policy, media, and education, you no longer have a republic. You have an oligarchy that has learned to wear the mask of democracy. The question is not whether this is happening. The question is what you are going to do about it. Because once you know that both presidential candidates in 2004 were members of the same secret society, once you understand that the Federal Reserve was created by men connected to that society, once you recognize the pattern of dynastic succession and interlocking power, you cannot unknow it. You cannot go back to naive faith in the system. The truth is that American democracy, to the extent it ever existed, has been captured by networks of elites who coordinate through secret societies, exclusive clubs, and interlocking directorates. Skull and Bones is the clearest example because of its concentration of power, its bizarre rituals, and its documented history. But it is part of a larger pattern of elite coordination that spans the globe. What happens next depends on whether enough Americans wake up to this reality and demand actual democracy rather than oligarchy with elections. The order has maintained power for nearly 200 years through secrecy, psychological manipulation, dynastic succession, and control of key institutions. Breaking that power will require sustained effort, alternative institutions, and a willingness to be called crazy by the very media outlets controlled by order allies. But the alternative is accepting that a small group of families, initiated through satanic rituals in a windowless tomb, will continue to decide when America goes to war, how much your money is worth, and what your children believe. If that sounds acceptable, then close this document and go back to sleep. If it sounds like tyranny, then the work begins now. The members of Skull and Bones are not supernatural. They are not invincible. They are simply men who have organized themselves better than their opposition, who have maintained their organization across generations, and who have convinced the world that their conspiracy is too absurd to take seriously. Once you strip away the mystery, they are revealed as what they are: a criminal conspiracy in plain sight, protected by secrecy oaths, institutional power, and media complicity. You have now seen the documents. You have seen the membership lists. You have seen the corporate connections. You have seen the policy coordination. You have seen 3 generations of the Bush family rising to power through the same secret society. You have seen how the Federal Reserve was created by men connected to the order. You have seen how CIA operations are run by Bonesmen. You have seen how wars are orchestrated by order members in policy positions. The evidence is overwhelming. The pattern is undeniable. The question is whether you have the courage to accept what it means. Because accepting it requires abandoning comfortable myths about American democracy, meritocracy, and the neutrality of institutions. It requires recognizing that the game is rigged, that the fix is in, that the same families have been running things for generations and plan to continue running things for generations more. Skull and Bones exists. It initiates 15 new members every year at Yale University. Those members go on to hold positions of enormous power in banking, law, intelligence, and government. They maintain lifelong bonds with each other. They help each other succeed over more qualified outsiders. They see themselves as a natural aristocracy, with the right and duty to rule. And they have been doing this for nearly 200 years. This is not theory, this is fact. What you do with that fact is up to you.